casing installation. I'm going to talk about how to case this window with the trim. First step is to make the sheetrock flush with the jamb. Most cases it comes around this window flush. There are a few places that are upward of 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch proud of the jamb. Again, this is a pretty good one, but Mike's going to show a technique to get it flush. So you can see the different reasons why the sheetrock is out. There's staples behind there. There's mud right here. Mike's done some adjustment with the hammer because if you encourage the sheetrock when it's close, you can sometimes get it back behind there without doing much work. But there's lots of areas where you have to just plain old use some elbow grease with a utility knife and score the sheetrock, just so that we're not damaging the wall underneath. In this case, this apron is going to go from wall to wall all the way across, and there's a big apron underneath it. So it's not critical that he stays right on the line due to the apron underneath. But in order for our stool to be touching the windowsill, we certainly are going to have to take off that paper. You can see between the casing there's going to be some sheetrock left, so we do want to be a little bit careful right in the middle there, but the sheetrock are just going to have to do a little bit of help. This window is an actually fairly easy one to get ready for. Some are much more difficult. Once we have that sheetrock kind of carved out, the window stool will sit tight to the jamb and will give a good joint for our trim. This took about 5 minutes, and you can see where they put mud up to about this spot here, so it's coming off the jamb in all spots. So Mike's traced the casing on the wall, and he's going to just cut out the sheetrock at those locations. So we got these ready. This window's ready and flush. And we got a pile of sawdust as well, so we might as well sweep that up because you're just going to grind it into the floor, push it down into the vents. No need for that. So now he's checked the window, and now we're just going to see how the stool interacts with the wall. You can see a small gap occurring on the side, so there's no reason we can't get rid of that as we make a small back cut. You got to figure there's always mud in this corner, and if you're a good sheetrocker, you'll have about a 1/16. Some sheetrockers can have more than that. You want to be careful when you take a dimension inside to inside like that for a window stool that you take the mud into account. So you might want to add an 1/8 or a 1/16 to the length. Same exact thing over here. Another way to solve this problem is just by simply tapping on it. A couple good whacks with your hammer to get that joint to be tight. Just to get rid of that little 1/16 of a gap, give it a little bit of a tap. It'll break the corner, but if you've done a nice job, you know, the sheetrocker is going to have. So now we've cut a piece to fit, cut it a little bit longer than we needed because we knew that we were going to do some adjustment to those corners. And we're going to just dry fit it, make sure that it works in there well. It should be touching the wall extremely well. Should be tight up against the stool of the window. And we're looking for the small radius to be just underneath that radius when this thing's fastened. Just enough for a bead of caulk, and where, you know, flush might not look quite as good. It looks okay, but just a little bit under is better. So now we've got to decide how the best to fasten it to this. There's a number of different ways. We've decided to use a 3-inch screw right through the bull nose and into that window at basically a straight angle. So that 3-inch screw will be right about there. And we'll probably put 4 in this window stool. This is a rare windowsill, or stool, so we don't have a notch along the back edge to worry about. Mike's marking the locations he wants to put the screw. If he pre-drilled it on the wall right here, the problem with that would be he may bite into the window a little bit, and the screw length is already just going into that window about 5/8 of an inch. There we go, rolling. So putting a screw right on the edge is not the best spot for it unless you want to fasten the stool well. But getting started real easy, going straight down. Just clean the bit out a few times. Clean that back off good, make sure it's in a good location. So now Mike's adding a little bit of glue to the front edge of the window stool. That's where the stool is going to go. We want a little bit of glue coverage there, even though we're going to put a screw on there as well. So now we're going to get a wet rag that we can use for glue. Just going to clean the glue off of that sill, and the only real good way to do that is with a wet rag. It's always good to have a way. You might have to use some drinking water or whatever, but it's worth it to have some water on your rag. You get the head of the screw right there, and it's done a little bit of damage to the wood. Obviously, we're going to fill that with Bondo, maybe a couple coats. All right, so Mike's marked 1/4 inch on these windows. Exactly 1/4 with his tri-square. He's gone around the whole window, and he's even marked the outside edge of the back band, which that was just for the sake of not cutting too much if he did have to hammer this out. But we've marked every corner with the 1/4 inch. That way you're not guessing. We want to get it exactly 1/4. So here Mike's carefully built a jack miter. And there's not a miter here, and you'll see why in a minute, but we're exactly on that point right there. And then you come over here and you put it exactly on that point as well. So we feel confident this header is the correct length. So now we're dry fitting the casing, and it needs to be a little longer than this 1/4 inch due to the jack miter. The jack miter actually raises. So you can see that jack miter has added 3/16 is the dimension that we decided was the right cut. And we did that on both sides. So the casing will be this 1/4 of an inch plus 3/16 for the casing leg. So Mike's just marked that pencil line on both of those legs. We'll measure to that. That'll be the length of the casing leg. All right. So now he's gonna just simply put it up there and mark where he put his pencil. The pencil was a little too short, so now he had to take that off again, drop it down. And now he's right on a really tan part of the wood. Will be difficult to mark it as well. He's got it nice and tight at the bottom. He's ready to cut it. He's marked it with an L for the left side. He's extending that line over. Clean off that sill real good so it has a nice tight fit at the bottom. He's holding it off just a little bit so he can get that dimension, pencil line. So we extended the line to the left this time because it was hard to get your pencil back there. So he's going to mark the left side of this board. So now we dry fit it, make sure everybody's happy. So we got the reveal exactly at 1/4. Got a nice cut here. This may not be perfectly the same, but that's all right because the back band's going to come through here. And as long as we make the compensation in the header, we'll be okay. So we got the jack miter cut with a jig on the table saw, and you'll see that later. And the table came through, the table saw blade did that, but the chop saw blade did this one. And you don't see the table saw blade from the front, but you do see it on the back, and that's acceptable. You can see there's relief in the middle of this casing, and that's to keep the casing a little bit flatter. And if there's any imperfection in the drywall, it also allows you to be tight here and tight here. We're going to put a pocket screw right here, and we're going to use it at that location and at this location. So this Kreg jig, the way it's set up, is about 1/8 of an inch past flush. Will end up giving us a hole that Mike thinks is most adequate, and it has to do with the location of that bearing. You can move the stop a little bit, plus or minus, but then you get close to not drilling a hole all the way through that pocket, and it'll be a little bit harder, a little bit more difficult to push the screw through when it becomes time. We finish off this hole with a pilot bit that allows us to enter into the secondary wood just a little bit easier. If that screw had to cut the hole, it'd push away the other board as it pushed in, and then getting it flush would be more difficult. During the process of screwing these boards together, it's important to clamp the face, or they'll misalign as that pocket screw is driven. How does it feel? Flush? You just check it for flush, make sure it is indeed the way you want it. So for the second joint, Mike's could get a workbench in here, but we're trying to make it where it's reasonably makes sense in the field. We've got it lifted up on the ground 3/4 of an inch all the way around it, so his finger could get underneath and feel for flush. So Mike's making sure that he can dry fit it and be a human clamp on this one. Push down pretty hard and drive that piece of wood. You can see the wood separating right there. And 9 times out of 10, you end up with a 32nd or a 16th. Maybe you make the adjustment with the next piece, making sure that that's flush or maybe a little bit proud as you drive it in. And that way you can be sure that it does end up flush. So we were out just a little bit. We decided to re-tighten the screw, pushing down on a shim. If you start a little bit proud on the backside, you can end up pushing it flush. And if it isn't flush, you can tighten it down just a fuzz more to get it to where you want it. So putting that shim on the backside, trying to make it flush. Yeah, put it on that. There you go. Push down on that thing. Make the adjustments that you need to. I mean, don't give up on it. Now it's right on flush on the backside, so we're feeling confident we can assume it's right on the inside, although we'll double check. Yeah, do that again. And he's got it right on the money. So you can see Mike's got this window put together, and we've got a back band that goes around this window. So as we install the back band and put it in place to mark it, we've noticed that it'll be difficult to nail it as we mark it. He's not gonna be able to get his nail behind there. So getting the board stretcher out, we got the right piece of back band, and he's gonna mark the end of it. We're gonna install this piece of back band before we install the casing legs themselves. That way we can get a nail, we don't have to get the nail gun around that corner. So having cut the back band to length, put some glue on it. So then going up and down just a little bit spreads the glue, makes it for a better contact. He's got 1¼ inch nails in there. He's gonna just grab the corner. That won't need any putty. It'll be difficult enough for the painter to paint it. All right, so Mike's dry fit the window. We put that back band on there, and now we're gonna run a bead of glue up the side of the casing legs and across the header. This joint's real important that between the window and the casing, it's touching and it's solid. The investment of time taking out the sheetrock to make sure it's touching, it will be well worth it. So Mike's got glue on there. He's standing up the window, laying it out to the 1/4 inch marks that we've been obsessing about in this video. I'm gonna put his first nail. I'm gonna put a consistent nail into that jamb so it looks like you know what you're doing. We don't want to be 2 inches in one spot and 1/2 inch in another. Keeping the nails between 12 and 18 inches apart and a couple inches from the end of the board. Not right at the end of the board, as it may split the wood. Trying to be parallel even with the nails as you go down. See the nice tight joint? Nice tight joint. A little bit of snipe right there from the table saw is not a problem. It's nice and flush. Got a good nail on there, and all the nails are set as you go. So you can see there's a small gap there. It doesn't look like much, but when Mike puts some pressure on the sill, we can get it up there just a little bit tighter. Maybe we drive a screw up underneath there, or we pound down from the top, see if we can get that. So he's pre-cut some pieces of back band just to get them ready for this next procedure, which is you stack the board on there, you make your cut, your mark. You mark it on the face of that way you want to know the angle of the cut.
Oh,
so you put a little mark on there just so that you know that, oh, when you get to the saw, you can't remember which way it's supposed to be. So this header piece, we shouldn't have to use a tape measure. So we draw that in on that side, make a nice tight fit, dry fit it, hold it really firmly. And then the variance of the header length, just in case we got a little bit of difference between the length of the header, which in this case is about a 30-second. Mike's going to just take for it into account when he puts his pencil line on there, and then draw the angle that he wants to cut on this piece of casing as well on the face. So just adds just a fuzz to the length of that, and then puts the angle on the face of that angle mark will help do that. All right, so now we got both pieces. We're going to take both pieces to the saw, and we're not going to use a tape measure for these two pieces. The top one was pre-cut, at 5 or 6 inches long. The side was a couple inches long, and now we'll take them both to the saw. So bringing these two pieces back from the saw, quick dry fit, and we're ready to glue it. Setting one end on the windowsill and putting a little glue on the other end. Placing it up there, going up and down with it just a couple times. Making sure it's sitting nicely on the stool. And again, about every 12 to 18 inches, driving a nail inside. You wouldn't want to put a nail in the face of this. There's just not enough meat for the nail. If you drive it into the face, there's not really anywhere to drive it. It'll mostly just go into itself. It may hit the corner, but it's just not as effective as putting it in the other end. It's good to have a wet rag around for your finger or whatever, but stain grade material is more important to have a wet rag because the stain doesn't absorb into the wood once the wood glue has been dried. The wood glue almost acts as a polyurethane and prevents the stain from being applied to the wood. So Mike's doing a good job just going down the piece from the top. Sometimes you may need a block of wood from the ceiling down because it's too close for a nail gun to go. And again, you don't want to put any in the face.
take the edge off.
So we're going to take the edge off just a little bit of that outside corner. We just want to round over that edge, maybe sand the face, get it ready for the painter. He's not going to do any sanding. He's going to just prime it, and we want to make it look like we care and we know what we're doing. You can also hit the face of that pocket hole, you know, the butt joint of the jack miter. Make sure that it's good. Just kind of go around. If you've done a good job, this is where it really pays off to get it flush. There's almost nothing to sand. If there's a 16th there, you need a belt sander or an orbital sander, and it's a real problem. But when you've done a good job, you can just kind of go back and forth and call it good. Kind of go over your process. Now we're going to look at filling up these holes. So at this done job, we have a 1x4 for an apron. Mike's carefully measured and decided to install this. We're going to use 2-inch nails, and we're going to do a nice job pinching it up, driving it in, being consistent with the nails straight up and down. So there's a number of different products. This one we're going to use plastic wood. You could use Bondo or plastic wood. I don't want to ever use caulking. Like briefly sands to get the burrs off of the hole so that he can push in the putty without being able to push the putty in. It's difficult. Simply putting some in his hand and leaving just a little bit excess on the outside that can be easily sanded later is the trick, because it does shrink just a little bit as it dries. So you kind of want to fill it up. Problem with this putty is it's easy to forget about because it is the same color as the wood. So we'll let that dry an hour or so and then we'll sand it. If you try too hard to make it perfectly flush, then you risk indenting it, making a little indentation or crater with your thumb. So this is a 15 gauge gun with 2.5-inch nails. Mike's going to go around the perimeter now of the casing. And the real important that you stay consistent with the brads you installed earlier. You don't want to be up and down from the brads. You want to kind of be parallel. You don't have to hit maybe every brad, but you want to hit it at very similar location to the brads. Staying 2 inches away from the end of the wood, because this nail is truly a lot bigger. And it will definitely split the wood given the opportunity. And remembering that there was no nails that inadvertently shot, that way we could set them right now. This window is complete other than sanding the putty holes. This joint's real important. It's tight the whole way. Real consistent. The window was installed well. The sheetrocker did a good job. We've got to do a good job. So this window is wall to wall. We've got to do this one. The other thing to note really is when we do the next one, it's got to be exactly the same height across there. If there's an 1/8 of an inch variance in the casing height, we got trouble. So if the window isn't exactly at the same height, which in this case it is, we notice the stool is perfectly in line. We'd still want to make the casing the same at whatever cost to the reveal. The reveal would take less precedence. So here we've done a mock-up only just to show you how we want to do a normal window, which is a finished end window. On the right-hand side, we're going to end the stool, and the location of the end of the stool is going to be right at the corner of the back band and the miter to the stool. So this dimension overhang will be the same as this dimension. And you would have to assume that this length would be the same as this length, but it isn't. So what you want to do is after you've installed this well and you put your screw here, you're going to actually measure what this dimension is so that you can cut an outside corner. And we want to write on there what it is that you've done. So like number 1 here, number 1 here. That way you can cut many pieces. You don't want to just cut one. You want to cut both sides. Maybe you want to cut all of them in the room. I don't want you to just cut one at a time. So you'd want to mark them at the saw, like number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. And that way you can cut all of them at the same time. And what's cool about that is that this piece will almost stay in itself. You know what I mean? And you won't have to put a lot of nails in. You will have to put some glue. You can see this piece was actually cut the exact same length or depth as this stool, and it's too long. So we can't assume anything. Sometimes they'll need to be longer because of some reason, and other times they'll need to be shorter. In this case, we need to make it about a 1/16 shorter. So we recut that piece. Fits perfectly in there. We'll put some glue on there, and then we'll shoot a nail in. Put a little bit of smoots on there. It's always good to spread it with your finger. You wouldn't think it's necessary, but it really is. And then we're gonna place that on there. Careful location with a couple nails. All right. You can see where he marked it. And it's tight to the wall. And finally, on a finished end, you want to line the apron up exactly with the end of the back band. So the length of back band to back band will be the size of your apron. We drew a pencil line through before we started. We can see it's just a little bit off. So when Mike puts it on there, he just wants to make it a little bit off so that is exactly in line with each other. And that's the finished end of the done windows.
So it's equal.
We've got 1 5/16 inches on the overhang on the front from the back band to the overhang on the side of the back band. And that's what intersects the miter so well. The only adjustment we want to make to these doors is just to mention that we never want the casing to be slammed tight against the door. Okay, so we don't want so you can see a small gap between the casing and the door, and now Mike's going to push it tight to it. So we don't want that. The door is going to squeak. It'll be impossible to paint. So we always want there to be probably 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch away. So the hinge side reveal may have to increase just a little bit. This is a thick casing. And it can be suspect to different problems if it's touching or too close together. Same thing on the strike side. So we're going to increase this reveal. You know, we've marked it at 1/4 everywhere. We're probably going to want to just have it 5/16 all the way around the door. That way, even at the strike, it's not a problem. So we got 5/16, and that keeps it away from the hinge a full 1/16 plus just a little bit. And we'll hold 5/16 across the top, 5/16 on the leg. Sometimes these aprons are returned on themselves, particularly if there's a profile on the face. But because there's no profile on the face, I prefer to see the end grain showing through. It would probably be suspect to the builder's choice when it's a flush, completely S4S apron like it is at this job. We'll just leave a flush. Now, if there was a 1/8 of an inch gap against the wall because the sheetrock was so bad, I would want you to cut it to reach that 1/8 of an inch. That way, just much like this happened, where we're able to add a little bit to the dimension of this. That way, I would want that to be added to as well. So Mike and I were just talking about how to get the length of the stool is your first job, because this is the first thing to install on these windows. So taking the square and putting it on the inside of the jamb, then taking your tape measure and measuring from the outside of the stool to the inside of the jamb. So 6 15/16 would be the overall length of the stool, longer than the interior of the jamb. Then the second part that'll be essential is that you mark the center of the stool and the center of the window, so that when you put this casing on there, it lands at the location that you're wanting. 14 inches minus 1/8. is the overall dimension if you've got two of these to deal with.